Well, good morning, good evening, whenever you are finding yourself watching this from home. Good evening to our studio audience as well, who's gathered here on Saturday evening. You know what? This week I was online at a few different gatherings with different people from the Brookview community, but also outside of the Brookview community. And in talking with people over video chat, one thing really hit home to me, and that is that you guys, this is tough. This season is tough for so many people for so many varied reasons. And one thing that I'm realizing is that there's no real good outlet for us to just kind of talk about what we're experiencing, the disappointments that we're facing, the challenges. As some of you, your work has completely changed overnight. You're trying to work while you have small children at home. You are trying to homeschool kids and get them caught up. All sorts of different crazy things going on. And what I just noticed is it's tough and it's hard. And one thing about that I realized, though, is there's two different ways of looking at that. We can say this is challenging, and that means we just kind of sit and we're paralyzed and we don't know how to move forward. And another thing that we can do is seize opportunity and say, you know what? This doesn't mean that I have to dismiss the chaos and the challenges that are going on and the hard stuff that's going on. That's real. But I can move forward. I can get up, and this is kind of a make it work moment. And I'm a little bit more postured to do that kind of thing, just my personality does that. And I'm realizing that's not like a given, and it's a really hard thing to do. And if I'm finding it really hard to do, I can only imagine that you're in the same boat as me. And so here's kind of what I was thinking about as I was talking about this. We don't have to be stuck. We have a big God, and God wants to walk with us through this. He wants to work in us, like in our personal lives because of this season, and then he wants to use us. You're positioned uniquely. My thing that I'm positioned to do isn't your thing that you're positioned to do. You might have 8 things that you're going to go and do really well. I might just have one thing that I'm going to do really well. But here's what I know. Our God is rooting for us, and he's with us. And our lives that we're living right now, they're a big deal. Whatever we bring, whatever we have to offer, we're offering it to the God of the universe who multiplies. And I've watched him do that in my life. I've watched him do it in this church community over and over and over when we bring just even the smallest gift of offering to him, and we surrender that to him and we say, God, use it, use me however you will. That is just the fertile ground. And I'm just so excited when the season breaks, but even in the midst of it, to watch a garden grow out of this kind of seemingly wrecked soil of our lives. And so here's what I wanted to say to you wherever you're at right now is you've got this. We've got this. God has us in his grip, and he wants to use us. I want you to know that I am praying for you. Like, I'm really praying for you. I love you guys. You are our family, and we miss you so much right now. And so just to kind of launch into our announcements, I just want to pray, and I just want God to be invited into this space even as we talk about what's going on here. God, you are so good, and you have big plans and big dreams for me, and you have big plans and big dreams for every person that fixes their gaze on you. And God, you want to equip us to do everything that you're asking us to do. And we don't have to set out to go and like change the whole world in one day. You might just want us to wake up at a rhythmic time, and that will be good enough. God, you might just want us to reach out to a friend who needs to hear from us, and that's enough. And God, may we find ourselves in you as enough. And God, would you give us words like of encouragement, words of your truth, God, words of your inspiration to go and to do more because our world needs you. And even in this seasons, we're called to be your hands and feet. And I pray that you would find us so faithful. And God, I'm thinking about this. I heard a speaker use this phrase, and I've just loved it and latched onto it. And it's this: God, will you do all that you want to do in me so that you can do all you want to do through me? And God, this COVID season is not separate from that. This is my life. This is my moment. And you want me to fix my gaze on you. So God, please help. In your name I pray. Amen. So we are, first of all, just wanting to extend a huge thank you to those of you that are reaching out to us and saying, hey, I watched the message today. That was uplifting. That was encouraging. I love what's going on here. We've had pictures come in of people who are sitting at home and watching the message. And it is just such a sweet gift to us. We're in this spot where we're like, we don't know what we're doing. We don't even know. We see views on Facebook, on YouTube from the video, but we're like, is it impactful? Is it helping? Is it meeting you? We normally have a church gathering on Sunday mornings where right afterwards Jason gets to talk to people and someone's like, man, that was awesome. And so when you reach out to us, it's such a sweet gift. And so I just want to give you a huge thanks for doing that. For those of you that have signed up on your online communication cards, you've gone to brookviewchurch.com and you've left little messages for us. It is kind of the lifeblood that we're living off of right now. So thank you. On Thursdays, Jason is gathering people. He has 2 different groups for Zoom meetings to talk about the message and kind of follow up and go more deeply into that. One is at 6:45 p.m. and the other one is at 8 o'clock p.m. And this is just kind of a personal aside. At the 6:45 meeting this week, our son Cameron got to join from Haiti. And I just think about the reality that he wouldn't be able to normally do that. That wouldn't be available to him. And I was talking to him, and Jason doesn't actually know this, but he was like, I've never been in a life group with Dad before. He's really good at it. I was like, I know, he is really good at it. What a sweet gift. And for him, he's in a country that doesn't speak his language. He's going to church where their values and the way that they view God is it's still very true, it's very real, and it's authentic, but it's not through the lens of the American culture. And so that was just a sweet breath of fresh air for him, and he was inspired and encouraged and just felt closer to God because of that. And I know that he's not the only person that felt that way. And so for those of you that haven't joined that yet and you're like, I don't really know if I would want to do that, I just encourage you to do it. Go and hang out with people. Share your story a little bit. Talk about what your day looks like. What I'll tell you about Jason is he's a super good listener, as evidenced right here. If you notice, you can get on Zoom through a computer. You can also use a tablet or your phone as well. So hopefully you'll realize if you're feeling like technologically challenged, that that's actually an easy way. I'll go back to the other screen. Easy way for you to connect, and it's not that difficult. But at the church, I would also like to help you navigate that. If technology is the only thing that's keeping you from being able to connect with other people, will you reach out to us via email? We would love to hear from you, and we would love to troubleshoot that on the phone with you and get you going. And you don't have to feel stupid because you don't know how to do it. We want to help, and I might be just as foolish as you, who knows, but at least we'd be together in it. I have been incredibly blessed. I've mentioned our kids' church online gatherings. This week we added our 2- and 4-year-old class to the gathering, and this is them. One of our littles came with his blankie to circle time. Best ever. One of them, while we were telling the story, was just spinning around in circles, and I didn't even care. It was just amazing. They were all there. And so I'm just getting great joy from that. This was our school-aged group, and we had a cat present with us, so that's pretty awesome. We did a lesson, and then we sent a mailing out to all the kids to follow up, and they could play a game, and it included eating Skittles. So that's a great game, in my opinion. So parents sent in pictures of their kids playing the game and getting Skittles. And then we've had a kid who was invited by somebody else, just a friend of a friend, and he shows up every Sunday morning. And I'm just kind of thinking about how cool that is. What a season of opportunity this is for us and for me to be able to make an investment in kids week in and week out. I feel pretty spoiled. And so if you have friends that you would like to invite, they feel lonely, their kids don't know what to do, this is an open door. The more the merrier. I'm not kidding you. It is just a super fun, action-packed, let's go, 30 to 45 minutes worth of a lesson. And if you go to brookviewchurch.com, there's a little schedule there, and then you can email me as well, and I will get you a link to that Zoom meeting. Easter. Like, this is going to be different. I'm used to buying an Easter dress and, like, really looking forward to dressing up and the food and just all those things. And so that's disappointing. But we have an opportunity to lean in a new way and kind of do it in an online way. And maybe it'll be really cool and super meaningful for us in a different kind of a way. And so for the week of Easter, starting Palm Sunday, which is for me tomorrow, for some of you that are watching this on Sunday, it'll be today. Casey and myself are going to hop on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll record a passage for the day, reading it and then giving some sort of thought around that is kind of connected to Holy Week and the events that were going on in this week leading up to Resurrection Sunday. So if you aren't already friends with us at Brookview Church on Facebook or on Instagram, same name, that's where we will be showing up this week for those things. And we would love to have you watch those if you're interested in doing that. And then Easter Sunday, what are we going to do for Easter Sunday? I don't know. I haven't gotten that far yet. But I have a lot of ideas in my mind right now. Here's a couple of things that I know about. We are looking at putting together an Easter experience for you. That can be you as a family. That can be you as a couple. That could be you as a single person. That could be you and your housemates. But we're going to call it Easter in a Box, with the idea that you will be showing up here at church and we will socially distance those boxes. And we're going to ask people to stay in their cars. If somebody's out of their car, you wait until somebody else gets in. So one person out of their car, we don't want to be irresponsible about this and have like a gaggle of people hanging out. Do you like the word gaggle after last week's group names? We're geese now. Okay, yeah, well, you do call me the goose, so that is fair. Okay, awkward. Can we edit that? No. Okay, well, I could explain it, but I won't. Just ask me, email me, say, what was that all about?
It's nothing romantic
Yeah, be quiet, little one. We'll talk about this later. Okay. Gaggles of people. We don't want people. Yes. Okay. Easter in a Box. There we are. You're going to come here to the church sometime on Sunday. We will have all the details rolled out for you via Facebook and Instagram so that you know how to participate in this if you would like to. The other thing that we would like to do is take communion as part of our gathering, our online gathering. We tried to get communion supplies that we could give to you to have for you, but they're all sold out everywhere. So if you would like to participate in communion, we're hoping that you could find some bread, you could find some wine, some juice. I think God would be okay with water as well in this season. Whatever you have that makes sense, we are going to participate in communion together after next week's message. Is that it for Easter that you know about? Did I forget something? Oh, yeah. One other idea that we had is, because we all miss each other and we're used to, after a Sunday gathering together and hanging out a little bit, we're going to try and do some pop-up Zoom rooms so that you can hop online and see everybody on Easter Sunday morning at a specific time together. So all the ideas are spinning, and I'm going to get them all sorted out. I'm sure of it. All right, I did mention that online communication card, and I hope that you will use that. There's all sorts of stuff in there, ways that you can respond, ways that you can sign up for stuff, ways that you can be prayed for. You can be giving us messages. In this season where we can't really talk to each other, just go online, click on that online communication card, and that will make its way to us. And then we just want to keep announcing this reality that because we're not gathering at church on Sundays and we're not taking an offering, the only way for us to survive on your generosity and your donations is through online giving and checks in the mail. And so if you go to brookviewchurch.com, there's a box that says give, and when you click that, this is the screen that you'll see, and it should be really easy to navigate. I did it. That's it. Jason, you're up.
So we've been in this series on the Sermon on the Mount, a talk that Jesus gave that really changed the course of human history. And in it, Jesus taught his followers some radical ways to reorient themselves around a brand new way of life. He showed them a new way to deal with things like anger. And we talked about that last week. A new way to deal with sexuality, a new way to deal with enemies, a new way to deal with prayer and worry. It's essentially reorienting everything around this new way of life that he came to offer to us. And today we're going to look at what Jesus had to say about judgment. We live in a world that is filled with judgment. And we all know what it's like to feel judged. The truth is, we're pretty much judged all day, every day. Now, sometimes it's super subtle and it's really like shallow and so quick, and you like catch somebody out of the corner of your eye and they're just sort of looking you up and down, and you know, and you can just feel they just judged you. They just did a quick little scan and they judged you. And they don't say anything, okay, but you know you've been judged. They've judged you by what you're wearing, or they've judged you by your friends, the people you hang out with, or they've judged you by what you drive, or they've judged you because of your tattoos, or because your lack of tattoos. Or maybe you're out with a big group of friends. This would have been a few weeks ago. You're out with a group of friends, and you order a beer. And you look around and nobody else has a beer. And you realize, like, oh man, I'm the only one here with a drink. And they're all looking at you like, you drinker. Or maybe it's the other way around. It's completely the other thing. You're out with everybody and everybody's got a beer but you. And because you aren't drinking, you are the object of judgment. Maybe you feel judged about the way you parent your kids, right? You got married one day and you're like, this is going to be awesome. And then you have kids and you're like, this is going to be more awesome. And then you discover your mother-in-law. And she just like hovers over you. She's just hovering and helicoptering, and you can just feel the judgment all the time. She disapproves of pretty much everything. And she keeps giving you these subtle little tips and suggestions, but you can feel it. You're being judged. Here's the really hard thing. One of the worst things about being judged and feeling judged is that you don't usually get to present your case. You don't usually get to explain yourself. You don't get to say, aha, I saw that look. Now, let me explain. I mean, you want to say, like, let me give you the whole picture because, like, if you knew it all, you'd cut me a little slack. You'd understand, like, there's a reason that I do it this way. There's more to this than you know. But when someone just quick judges you, you don't usually get that opportunity, right? And here's something else that I've noticed about feeling judged. When somebody judges me, I don't usually respond to their judgment by thinking to myself, you know, you've made me feel so small and inadequate, so I think I'll change. You know, thank you for that. I feel so inspired to become better and to change and to grow. In fact, what I really want to do is I want to become just like you. I mean, honestly, when I feel judged, I just don't feel compelled to change. It's like the opposite, like I'm stubborn and I want to dig my heels in. And I certainly have no interest in becoming more like the person that's judging me. Usually what happens is I want to run in the opposite direction. I want to get as far away from that kind of a person as possible. But here's the reality. As much as we all hate being judged, as much as we all know how bad it sucks, we all do it to other people. We all do it to other people. The same way that it is done to us every day, we turn around and we do this to other people every day. And today, I want us to see that Jesus is actually inviting us into something different, something better. Because his dream was to create a new kind of community, a kind of community where people actually learn to love each other and where they also learn to love those outside of their community. Here's what's painfully ironic to me. It's that in our culture, in the U.S., the word judgmental is often synonymous with being a Christian. Is that crazy? Now, some of that is Christians, like just being unfairly judged. Sometimes we just kind of get a bad rep, but most of it isn't that. Most of that perception that we have is legit. In fact, in American culture, because Christians so often do not get this right, there are entire groups that just feel ostracized by the church. And the reason that they feel judged is because Christians will say things like, well, by golly, you're wrong, and we're right, and we've got the Bible verses to prove it. The problem is, when we judge somebody, they just don't usually move in our direction. And yet large portions of the church continues to insist on saying, okay, this group needs to stop, and this group needs to change, and this group needs to shape up, and this group needs to get it together. And the problem is, if you look around, nobody's changing. They're just running in the opposite direction, just like you and I do when we feel judged. Yet at the same time, this whole teaching of Jesus is really, really confusing and complicated because there are moral standards, aren't there? I mean, there are behaviors that just really are not okay, aren't there? I mean, God doesn't just want us to say that like everything everybody's doing whenever they're doing it is all okay, right? Well, today we're going to think about this whole judgment thing because when Jesus described what being the salt of the earth is like, when he painted a picture of what it is to be light in this world, the issue of judgment turned out to be like in his top 10. You think about that. Top 10. So today I want us to dive deeply into his teaching on judgment. And so here we go. This is Matthew chapter 7. Jesus says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Now, sometimes people hear those words and assume that Jesus must be saying something like, hey, you should absolutely never be critical of someone else or tell them that they're wrong. You should never form negative opinions about anyone or anything. It is always wrong to judge people. Jesus said so. So even though someone else's thought patterns or behavior or lifestyle may be leading to obvious destruction, You have to learn to approve of it and accept it. Now, obviously, if we think about what Jesus taught in other places and how he behaved and how he lived, he can't be saying that. Right? He cannot be saying that. That cannot be what he means. Because Jesus called people out and confronted people on stuff all the time. He confronted the disciples on stuff all the time. He confronted people that were headlong in sin, on their sin, over and over again. He confronted the man who had great wealth on his love of his money. He confronted the Pharisees all the time. When Jesus saw something destructive, he named it. You think about how often and how brutally he challenged the religious leaders. I mean, they were leading people away from God, and so Jesus didn't just sit there saying, oh, well, different people think different things. It's all good, like to each his own. Like, who am I to judge? I mean, one person's approach to God is just as legit as any other's. That is not the approach that Jesus had when it came to all this. I mean, listen to some of the stuff that he said. Matthew chapter 23 is just unreal. It's just Jesus unloading. If you want to just get some entertainment. If you don't like religious people, read Matthew 23, because it's Jesus unloading on religious people. If you think you don't like them, Jesus really didn't like them. And so here's some of the stuff that he said in Matthew 23. Let me just go through this. This is awesome. It says, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do. For they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads, put them on men's shoulders, and they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Woe to you. Here Jesus starts going off. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Wow. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give 1/10 of your spices, right? You go through your cabinets and you pick out 1/10 of your spices, so you're tithing to perfection. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. Now, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So he says, you blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee. First clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. Like, wow, Jesus, he's not even done. I'm continuing on. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You're like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous. You look holy on the outside, but on the inside, you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Clearly, Jesus did not believe that everything everybody does is okay. And clearly, Jesus isn't teaching us that we have to learn to accept and approve of everything everyone does. So in that case, if that's the case, what in the world is he saying? What's the point then? Do not judge. And I would say a great way to paraphrase what he's saying here is very simply this. I heard this one time and I loved it. What he's saying here is basically this. He's saying, I want you to learn to apply the golden rule. And what is the golden rule, everybody? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the golden rule. That's the essence of what it is to love others. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus is saying, I want you to apply the golden rule, which, by the way, also comes in the Sermon on the Mount. I want you to apply the golden rule to the way you judge people. He's saying, judge unto others as you'd have them judge unto you. And this is so powerful, and this is so important. Jesus is saying, I want you to judge other people the way you would want to be judged by them. I want you to take the same approach in judging others that you would want God to take in judging you. Now, see, I know how I want other people to judge me. I know how I want God to judge me. When God judges me, I want him to take like everything into consideration. Where I was raised and what I had and what I didn't have and what happened psychologically to me when my parents divorced. I want him to take into consideration that from 4th grade on, I didn't really have a dad around. And so I was kind of starving for male approval. And so much of my really bad behavior stemmed from all of that. And now, before I get all carried away, because I could just like go on a tangent, and we would all need tissues in here. And it would be, here's the point. Okay, when I get judged, I want everything taken into consideration. And honestly, if you get me going and just let me talk long enough, eventually it feels like Jesus would have to come and put his arm around me and say, oh, poor Jason. You had so much to overcome. No wonder you're such an idiot, right? Like you poor guy, you never had a chance. You never had, so you just get a pass on everything. Here's the point. I want people to be slow and very careful in how they judge me. I want grace. I want people who judge me to say, yeah, I know he's got some issues. That's obvious, okay? But there may be more to it than we know, and so let's be very slow to judge just because we probably don't know the whole story. I want a lot of slack when I'm judged, don't you? Do you want slack? But I don't want so much slack, if I'm really honest. There's a part of me that goes, well, just don't ever judge me. There's a part of me that goes, I don't think I actually want that. I don't want so much slack that I'm never challenged. I actually need people to call out the best in me. I need it. I want people that love me enough to confront me and to push me toward better things. People that care enough not to just sit by and then watch me settle for less in my life. Okay, but this is such a fine line, right? There's a big difference between judging people and correcting them because we love them. What Jesus is condemning here is this attitude that just sort of writes people off. Judgment is defining people by their faults and their failures. It's defining people by their faults and their failures. What judgment does is it just holds people down. Correction is intended, the hope in correction is that we're lifting people up. This is why judgment is so damaging. It limits people. It puts boundaries on who they are. It puts limits on what they can do and who they can become. When we judge people, we write them off, in a sense. We're just writing them off. But not judging people it does not mean that we just ignore their faults and their problems or their failures. It means that we refuse to define people by those things. We refuse to label them, to put them in a box, to write them off. In judgment, we see the fault, and that's all we see. In correction, we see the person behind the fault. And we don't confuse a person's fault with their essence. Jesus is not saying that we should ignore obvious problems or patterns of destruction in the lives of people around us. Instead, Jesus is very simply inviting us to love people in the way that we judge. Judge unto others as you would have them judge unto you. Now, then he goes from here and he takes it a step further, and this is awesome. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? So Jesus here turns to this ridiculous illustration to make a point. And what he does is he kind of enacts a little bit of theater. And we have to imagine first century, him on a hillside, thousands of people. This would have been hilarious. People would have been knee slapping at this point. Like, Jesus, that's hilarious. Right? Because the point of this is to be absurd. It's to be kind of funny. It's to be memorable. And so I really want us to get the feel of what Jesus is talking about. This is a 2x6 plank. That's pressure treated and everything from my garage. Most of the cobwebs are off of it. I grabbed it just before I got to church here. But here's the picture that Jesus is giving us. Okay, this is the picture that Jesus is giving to us. He's saying, like, how can you go about pointing out a little tiny speck of sawdust in someone else's eye when you have this huge freaking plank in your own eye? Okay, so literally, he's giving us this picture. And so, I mean, just think about how absurd what he's saying is. He's like, this is the kind of guy he's talking about. He's like, the guy comes up to you and he's like, hey, man, you know, I don't want to be like weird or anything, but I noticed you got a little thing in your life, and it's right there in your eye. And so, you guys, this is so heavy. I was trying to reach out with one hand. Oh, here we go. And you got this little thing in your life, and so let me just reach in there and get that little speck out of your eye. If you don't mind, I'll just help you out because you kind of got a problem. This is a guy that's just, it's so absurd. This is a guy that comes up to you and he's like, hey, man, you know, we've all been talking. All of us have been talking. And we've noticed you got kind of an issue in your life. And so if you don't mind, you just let us come together, we'll get in there and we'll get this little thing out of your life. It's ridiculous. It's supposed to be ridiculous, right? So Jesus is giving the crowd this image, and this is so brilliant. And this is brilliant because Jesus is, I got some sawdust on my face. Now I'm going to literally get dust in my eye and cobwebs. Oh, thanks, Brooklyn. I got somebody here who wants to get it out of my eye for me. Oh, man. Okay, so Jesus he's like, hey, how can you point out this tiny little thing in someone else's life when you have this glaring, huge issue in your own life? And so he continues. He says, you hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And here, Jesus points out something critical. And this is so huge. Like, to see clearly enough to be able to help someone else, my heart has to be in a really healthy place. When my heart is off, I'm just likely to do more damage. When I start getting all mixed up in someone else's business and my heart isn't really right, I'm likely to just do more damage. Now I got stuff all over me. You guys, okay. Someone, I saw you seeing it. You wanted to come up here and pick it off, didn't you? And you're like, oh, sweetie, you got a little sawdust. It's so good. Okay, so, thank you. Okay. So Jesus starts verse 3 by saying, okay, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? And that's the key question. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? Why? Why do you truly care about this other person's problem? What's motivating you to care? What's motivating you to even notice? Like, they got this issue, so what? Why do you care? And friends, this is like a huge question. This is such a penetrating question when we're feeling judgmental towards anybody about anything. And if we were willing to pause and actually ask ourselves this question, I think it would cut most of our judgment off right at the knees. So once we notice a problem that someone else has, once we start to feel ourselves puffing up and getting all judgmental, what if instead of executing judgment, what if we paused and simply asked, what's truly motivating me to care about this issue at all? Like, what's going on inside of me causing me to be so concerned about this other person's problem? And Jesus says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? In other words, Jesus is saying to me, Jason, how come you're so excited and motivated to think about their problems and not your own? And now, that's an easy one. I do know the answer to that. What problems? Right? I don't have any problems. I look at them, Jesus. They got problems, and look at them. Look at that guy. Look at her. They've got problems. But I don't want to think about my issues. It's easier and more fun to just think about everybody else's. And what Jesus is asking us to do is to pause and reflect and say, well, why is that? Why is it so exciting and energizing for me to look at what's wrong with everybody else? And one of the best ways to begin to do this is to pay attention to the specific emotion that their speck of sawdust or their issue elicits in me. So when I get all fired up about somebody else's speck, what emotion accompanies all of that passion for me? Does their issue make you jealous? Is that what it is? It's jealous? Well, she shouldn't wear that. Right? Well, that's because you shouldn't wear it. I mean, come on. And you know it. Well, she shouldn't dress like that because I used to and I can't anymore, right? We have to ask, is there more to this than just my pure concern for this other person? Is there something else that's going on inside of me? Does this other person's problem really help you feel better about yourself? Is there a pleasure that you get from recognizing that somebody else has got a problem or a speck in their eye? Does it make you feel superior or even self-righteous? Ask yourself, like, what is the emotion that's going on inside of me? Maybe as a parent at times, it's good to ask ourselves, why does it bother me so much when I feel like my kids fall short? Why am I so emotionally impacted when my kids mess up? Well, maybe it's that I base my own identity on the success of my kids. And so when they fall short or they mess up, it's a reflection on me. And so maybe I'm actually being way more explosive and more critical because of that. And what I'm doing is I'm just tearing them down and I'm creating this relational barrier between the two of us. I've been really thinking this week, not just about judgment, but I started thinking about, like, well, what's the opposite of this? Like, if Jesus says don't judge, then what are we supposed to do? What's the opposite of judgment? Like, if we run from and we avoid people that judge us, then what would be the opposite of judging people? And here's the thought that just kind of occurred to me this week. It occurred to me that people can feel it when someone loves them and believes in them. Like, think about yourself. Think about your life. Who have these people been for you? I mean, think about growing up. What was it like growing up? Like, who was your favorite teacher? Or maybe a coach that you had that was just outstanding, or a grandparent that came alongside of you and was this for you. Or maybe you had an aunt or an uncle or a neighbor, somebody in your life that was this for you. Here is my guess about that person. Here's my guess about what it was that made them so impactful. Among many other things that may have been unique about them and your relationship with them, I bet that you could feel that they loved you, and I bet you could feel that they believed in you. My kids we've kind of lived in the same spot, and so my kids have all gone through the same schools, and we're on kid number 3 now, going through the schools. Yeah, you go, girl. And at the middle school, where our third child is these days, there is like a legendary science teacher, and his name is Mr. Simon. And wave after wave of kids have gone through that school, and then they go to high school, and then they graduate, go on to college, or whatever else they do. And then they come back, and you kind of run into them, and if you ask them, hey, why don't you tell me about a teacher that was special to you, or tell me about a teacher that was really good? I've heard it for years and years from so many different kids, Mr. Simon, Mr. Simon, Mr. Simon. So forever, I've kind of had this picture in my mind of this guy, Mr. Simon. And this year, I for the first time, I finally met him. And he was not the guy that I had in my mind. I pictured this like boisterous, hilarious, kind of odd, actually, sort of unusual guy. And then in January, I met him, and he was kind of average. So Brooklyn was playing basketball for the middle school team, and Mr. Simon would keep the scorebook for all the home games. And so Jen and I sat right behind the score table because it happened to be at half-court, perfect primo seats. And so we're sitting right behind him at the score table for all these home games, but we didn't know that that was him. And so to us, he was just like this pleasant, warm person keeping score, like cheering for the kids. So toward the end of the season, like one of the final games of the year, Brooklyn came up into the stands after a game, and she came and stood with Jen and I. And so Mr. Simon made the connection that we were her parents. And so he introduced himself, and when he saw us with her, he just kind of lit up, and he turned around and he said, "Oh my gosh, you guys are Brooklyn's parents." And we're like, "Yes." And he's like, "That's so awesome." He's like, "I'm so excited to meet you guys. This is so amazing." I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Yes, no, this is so cool." So he just smiled at her, and then he kind of started going off. He's like, "Man, what a great kid she is. Like, you guys must be doing a really good job. But like, she's a great kid, and she's a great player, but even more, she's just a great person. I love having her in my class." And then he started telling us about all these different things that he loves about her. And of course, she's loving it. She's like, "Go on," right? And she's just kind of smiling, and she's like looking up at him. And so I'll tell you what, I immediately liked him. I liked him immediately, because when people are good to your kids, it has that effect, right? So Brooklyn went into the locker room, and Jen and I just waited around in the gym until she was ready to go. And so I just kind of sat back and I watched Mr. Simon for a few minutes. And for the next 10 minutes or so, I watched something kind of stunning. I watched kid after kid after kid come up to him. And sometimes they would come in packs. Sometimes they would just come like one by one. But kid after kid after kid wanted to be near him and wanted to stand next to him and wanted to talk with him. And they would just kind of look up at him and smile like, "Hey, Mr. Simon." And some of the kids would come up and they would high five him. And other kids, they come up and they fist bump him, and little side hugs. And everybody's kind of got their own special little thing with Mr. Simon. And some of them would tell him about something that was going on. And some would just say hi, and then they would just kind of wait there awkwardly. And because he's really good with kids, he would make conversation with them. They just wanted to be near him. They just wanted to be near this guy. And the thing that was striking to me about it was all kinds of kids. Some of the kids were carrying instruments, right? They had their trombone or their violin or, whatever. Some of the kids were holding basketballs. Some of the kids were, they were athletes. Some of the kids were like, you could tell they were popular kids. Some of the kids, they were nerdy kids. Some of the kids were short kids. Some of the kids were tall kids. Some of the kids were chubby kids with glasses. "Hey, Mr. Simon." Some of the kids were like tall, awkward, skinny kids that hadn't like been able to coordinate their bodies yet. It was boys and girls of every kind. Some of them looked like little kids, and some of them they'd hit puberty and they looked like adults, right? And they're all the same age, which is so weird when it's middle school kids. But Mr. Simon seemed to have this connection with all of them. And so for 10 minutes, I just stood in the gym in awe of this guy. And I felt incredibly thankful for him. But I wondered to myself, as I sat there watching this, I was like, what in the world would make a teacher so universally popular? I mean, he's probably really funny, right? And he's probably a really good communicator. And he's probably a really good teacher. And he probably has really good classroom management skills. Like you cannot teach in the middle school. You will get eaten alive if you do not have good classroom management skills. You got to get those kids engaged and functioning and all of that. But when I watched him, I was like, you know what? There's something else going on here. And it occurred to me. Something else was going on, and it was pretty simple. And it was this. He really likes these kids. He genuinely likes these kids, all of them. The short, chubby ones and the tall, skinny ones and the nerdy ones and the popular ones and the vain ones and the humble ones. He likes them all. And he believes in them. He believes in every one of them, and they can feel it. They can feel it. Now, these are 12 to 14-year-olds, so they got faults. They got all kinds of faults. I mean, it's crazy how many faults they have. And he has to be able, he's not blind. He has to be able to see some of that stuff. Day after day, he must see some of the most crazy stuff. But he doesn't define those kids by their faults and their failures. He looks at them, every one of them, and he sees beauty in them. And he sees something in them that's magical. And they're special to him. like each one. And I think that there is a reason that these kids are flocking to him like seagulls after bread in the gym after a basketball game. Because he believes in them, he loves them, and they can feel it. In fact, he likes them so much, he volunteers to keep the scorebook after school for these games. Who would do that? Like after his paid day is done, he's just hanging around the school to be around the kids. That's crazy. These kids are going through one of the hardest seasons of their lives, and here is a guy who looks at them and he adores them. He sees past all their middle school weirdness and all their flaws. He sees past some of the boys and the way they smell, right? He sees their essence. He sees what's beautiful and what they can become. And you know what? These kids can't get enough of him. And you guys, I just in watching that, I just want to say, like, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. I really do. Okay, I do not want to be a middle school teacher, though. The idea of being a middle school teacher makes me break out in cold sweats. Like, God bless the people who are willing to go back to middle school. I survived middle school barely, and I have no interest in ever going back there. But I do want to be someone that makes people feel like that. I really do. And the problem is, too much of the time, that's just not who I am. When my heart is right, I am. But when my heart is not right, guess what? I'm critical, I'm judgmental, and when I'm off, I can't see clearly enough to be able to remove the speck from somebody's eye. When my heart's in a bad spot, I'm so eager to judge, I'm so eager to criticize, and this is just human nature. It's like our emotions just affect us so deeply. I mean, sometimes we are so eager to judge. Why are we so eager to judge? And I'm going to just throw out a couple of different factors that I've noticed, and there are many. I'm just going to throw out a few. Here are just a few factors that I've noticed. One is we're insecure, right? We're insecure. Like anytime I'm not feeling good about who I am, I'm prone to judge. I can't celebrate other people if I'm feeling terrible about myself. And so what do? I find ways and I look for ways to tear people down. Another factor is when we're scared, right? When I'm really uncertain and when I'm really worried that something bad's going to happen and I just feel like my feet aren't on solid ground and I don't know what's going on, I can get really, really irritable and really, really critical of everybody around me and so judgmental. Another factor is when we're lonely, right? If I don't feel connected and I don't feel like I have people, like where are my people? I feel like I'm on the outside. If I feel like I don't fit or I don't belong, or I feel like nobody understands me, man, I get so critical. And then like one more is when we're jealous, just jealous, right? When someone has something that I want, which happens a lot, you know, I want attention or I want affirmation, or if someone else has nicer stuff, they get a nicer car, nicer house, nicer clothes, nicer abs. That one's a little more rare, but you know, like when someone else's kids are more successful than mine, man, watch out, because my heart is ripe for judgment. I cannot wait to tear somebody else down. Now, we know this stuff, right? You're like, I know that. I know that when these things are going on, I'm more judgmental. Yeah, I know. But what I'm trying to point out is that Jesus is making a point, and it's that God longs to heal us, to come into our life and heal us. And when we feel this stuff and then we bring it to God and we say, please help me, He is eager to step in and begin freeing us from this stuff. He's eager to step in and create something new in our heart. And guys, this is how we get the plank out of our eyes. This is how it happens. This is how we start seeing clearly. But this is a really unique season of life, as Jen mentioned earlier. This is such a unique season of life. And for so many of us, there's so many emotions that are getting all stirred up every day. There's insecurity, and there's fear, and there's loneliness, and there's jealousy. I mean, you look on Instagram and someone else seems to be having a better life than you, or Facebook, or whatever. And this stuff is getting all stirred up, and so we got to watch out, because if we're feeling that stuff, judgment so easily follows. So we have to be extra diligent about looking at the plank in our own eye. So how's your heart? Are you somebody who's capable of loving and building people up these days? Sometimes people hear a passage like this from Jesus and they think, well, he said, until you get the plank out of your own eye, don't even worry about someone else's speck. The reality is I got a lot of issues. I got a lot of faults and failures, and so I can't really help other people with their stuff. Like, I got to get all my stuff sorted out before I can help anybody else. Guys, that's insane. It's insane, because if that were true, we would all be disqualified from helping each other. You don't have to be perfect. But here's what you do need. You need to be capable of loving and seeing beyond people's flaws. Now, here's the beauty of this for those of us that follow Jesus. And it's that this is exactly how Jesus loves us. We experience it. We see it modeled for us. And we are being apprenticed by the one who shows us the way. This is how God sees you. This is how God sees you. Think about that. God sees beauty in you that you would not believe. God sees beauty in you that you do not see yourself. He sees your flaws and he sees your faults and he sees all of that stuff very clearly. But he refuses to define you by that stuff. And that's why he sent his son to you. That's why he sacrificed his son for you. His son who not only was and is the way, but the very one that came to show us the way. And this is how Jesus loved people. He saw all kinds of flaws and failures, and yet he condemned no one. He condemned no one, not one. He offered love and he offered grace. Jesus saw even beyond the most horrendous flaws and failures in people's lives. I was thinking this week about how harsh Jesus was with the Pharisees, right? In the passage that we read earlier, that's harsh, right? And he just kind of blasted them. But when you think about it, they were the teachers of God's people. They were the ones who told people how to have a relationship with God, and they had it wrong. They had it really, really wrong. Their brand of religion excluded people, and it hindered them, and it held them down. And so Jesus, because he loved people, had to name it, and he had to challenge it. He absolutely had to. But at the same time, and sometimes I think we forget this, at the same time, Jesus loved the Pharisees. He loved the Pharisees. Even in the Pharisees, Jesus could see more than just their flaws and their failures and their scheming and their planning and their wickedness. There was so much sin in the Pharisees, and he saw it all clearly, but he also was able to see beyond it to their essence. The Pharisees, you think about it, they orchestrated his arrest and his trial and his crucifixion, and as the nails were pounded into his hands and his feet, they were the reason that it was all happening. But even then, Jesus refused to put them in a box. Even then, he believed there was still good in them. Even then, he believed that these guys could be redeemed. And we know that because as they shouted insults at him with his hands and feet nailed to a cross, Jesus prayed what? Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They don't have any idea how bad this really is, God. And even though he saw them at their ugliest, he refused to define them by it, even in that moment. He believed that those responsible for his suffering were actually redeemable. And the reassuring thing is, this is exactly how he views you and me. And I'm so thankful because I got a lot of flaws and I got a lot of failures. And so do you. But Jesus won't limit you because of them. Jesus will never write you off. This is how he loves us. This is how he treats us. And this is the way that he's showing us. He's inviting us into an entirely different kind of life in so many arenas. But this judgment one is a big one. And it's not easy. When we think of apprenticeship to Jesus, like learning from him how to be like him, this is master's level stuff, isn't it? But what if you and I could actually get there? Like when Jesus says, do not judge, what if you and I could actually get there? What if you and I actually learned to let go of judgment? What if walking with Jesus can actually set us that free? And this is why apprenticing under him is it's like nothing else. The more we interact with Jesus, who treats us this way, the freer we become to treat others this way. And when that happens in you, when it actually happens in you, when people feel love from you and they know that you believe in them, they will walk through fire to be near you. They will. Because this is different. Because this is rare in our world. People are absolutely starving for it. They can't find it. But if you become this for them, they will walk through fire to be around you. Like a 7th grade science teacher in a gym. And I think about Mr. Simon and all that I saw that day in January. Those kids, they had found something in him. And I think about Jesus and I go, it's amazing because Jesus seemed to have that same kind of effect on people. Probably a little more with Jesus. I like Mr. Simon, but probably a little more with Jesus. He seemed to have that effect on people. The woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, Mary Magdalene, Peter and James and John and Andrew and hundreds of others who were with him and had looked him in the eye. They felt it. They knew it. On the other hand, you and I can choose the way of judgment. We can choose it over and over again, day after day after day. We can criticize people. We can put them in boxes. We can write them off. And of course, those people too will walk through fire. They will walk through fire to get away from us. And really, the choice is ours. Who do we want to be? What kind of effect do we want to have on people? And so often we think of judgment in terms of things like social media or, there's like all this condemnation, right, on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. People just judging people that are very different from them, that are kind of far away. It's the people on the right judging the left and the people on the left judging the people on the right. And it just goes back and forth. And it's kind of crazy. But we don't just judge those that are far away and different from us. The sad thing is that most often we judge most harshly those that are close to us. And some of you have extremely deep mother wounds and father wounds. And it comes down to this. You grew up and you felt like you were not enough. No matter what you did, no matter who you were not enough. You still feel this way, and it is an ache that plagues you day after day, even as an adult. Parents, you don't want to do that to your kids. I don't want to do that to my kids. But if we're not really, really careful, we can do this to the ones we love most. And as kids, we can do this to our parents. We can. We just write them off. They make mistakes, and they've made mistakes raising us, and they continue to make mistakes. And as we get to be adults, we recognize them more and more and more. And so we just write them off. We just condemn them, and we just go, mom, dad. We put them in a box, and we won't let them out. We do this to our spouses. We define them sometimes by their worst moments. We define them by their deepest flaws. We do this with our siblings. Something happens at some point in our life, and we put them in a box, and we won't let them out. We lock the box, and we refuse to ever let them out. And it isn't just the people far away that we judge so often. It's the people in our own homes. It's the people around our dinner table. And I suspect that that's probably the most damaging. So I just want to close this thing with a simple question. Who in your life needs to know that you love and believe in them? Who in your life right now needs to know that you love and you believe in them? Who is most looking to you for that? Who in your life is desperate to get that from you? Like, what if you saw clearly? If you've had a plank in your eye, what if you got it out of your eye and you saw clearly? And what if they could count on this from you? Who in your life most needs to know that you love them and that you believe in them? Because that is the opposite of judgment. Father in heaven, I thank you that you love us the way you do. It's kind of mind-blowing to me, with all of my flaws and all my failures and all my sin and all of my junk, that you see that stuff. You see it clearly. You see it way more clearly than I do. And yet you don't define me by that. And God, in this season where we have so many emotions all stirred up and we feel unsure and scared and lonely and insecure and all of that stuff is going on, God, I pray that you would help us to work through that in ways that we don't get this huge log in our eye and just start walking around critiquing and judging and blaming and tearing into the people that are sitting in our dinner tables and in our homes with us and the people that we are closest to. God, in this season, would you help us take steps to become the kind of people that you want us to be, living the kind of lives that you want us to live. Teach us to love. Teach us to judge unto others as we would have them judge unto us. God, would you make that possible for us? In Jesus' name, amen.